Okay, welcome everybody to A Decade Never to Be Forgotten. This is the episode for April, and we are interviewing Jake Harmer. And for those of you who are new, just want to give a little background here. What we're doing over the next decade is we're interviewing 12 different people about their lives over the next decade, about how it's going to be a decade never to be forgotten. So this is me and Jake talking for April of 2025. And then we'll come back and revisit this conversation every year for the next 10 years and see what trials he's going through, what changes are happening, what struggles he's facing, what celebrations he has, all that stuff. So, Jake, to start out, let's start with what led you to this point. What brought you to where you're at right now?
Yeah, where am I right now?
I know, right?
So I am married, been married 10 years this August. I've got three kids with another one on the way in July. Um, Live in St. George, Utah, which is kind of my dream location. This is where, after having grown up in Utah Valley with all the snow and everything, and then served a mission in Brazil and enjoyed 2 years of no snow, this is where we really wanted to end up. And so, kind of the way COVID worked out, I got to work remote and then switched to a different employer that let me stay remote. And so that's how we ended up in St. George.
Awesome.
We
So
do,
people are gonna
yeah, go ahead.
wonder what mission in Brazil, because lots of people have served in Brazil. My dad, my uncle, my nephew, or not my uncle, my brother-in-law, my nephew. So lots of people in Brazil. Where were you at?
Yeah, so I studied German for 4 years in high school. My parents both served
Nice.
missions in Austria. I'm the oldest in my family, and so I was very much expecting a German speaking mission. And then I went to Ribeirão Preto, Brazil.
Oh
And
man.
so the interior of Brazil, I always say it's like the Omaha of Brazil.
Ah,
It's just sugarcane
awesome.
fields everywhere, lots and lots of farmers, lots of industrial agriculture out there. Yeah, it
Cool.
was very much a huge surprise to get called to Brazil. I did have two uncles that served there. Yeah, everybody, there are 35 plus missions there, so it's not all that uncommon.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. And so you got used to the weather, and you said that's where I want to end up living, is somewhere nice and
Yeah.
warm and
Yeah,
no
well, it was
more
funny.
snow.
When I got back from my mission, so I had kind of been dating my wife before. We were in the same freshman ward at BYU. We were the FHE mom and dad. And so we say that it was an arranged marriage by our bishop.
Yeah,
But we,
that's awesome.
yeah, so we had kind of dated, this pre-mission. So I knew when I left on my mission, she would probably either be on a mission or be married when I got home because that's who she was. She wanted to serve mission and stuff, and because of our ages being the same, that meant that when I got back, she'd be gone. So I was like, "Well, this is fun. You're awesome. Good luck with life." We wrote a little bit. It's funny, the way I remember it was that it was pretty just writing as friends. And as I've gone back through some of the letters, I'm like, "Oh no, I definitely really cared about her." Anyway, when I was in the MTC was when the age changed for missionaries. And so I remember my first thought was my brother, because suddenly our 4 year overlap was only going to be three, and that was going to be really cool. And then I thought about her, and I was like, oh, whoa, now she can go, and that means we'll get back. And we ended up getting back the same month. When I got home, though, she wanted nothing to do with me.
Oh,
Or I got home
fascinating.
like 3 weeks before her, and yeah, she got home and she wanted to marry a Nephi, and all she had was a Jacob. So
Yeah, that's tough, man. So where did she go on her mission?
so she went to St. Paul, the Twin Cities in
Okay,
Minnesota. So yeah, we joke
nice.
about that too. That I went to Sao Paulo, the state of Sao Paulo. She went to St. Paul, Minnesota. My little
Oh,
brother went to San Pablo in the Philippines.
huh,
Thank goodness for the
that's
Catholics,
awesome.
huh?
Yeah, no
But
kidding. Naming everything.
yeah, yeah. So she served in Minnesota and spoke a language called Quran. It's a group of refugees from Myanmar, Burma, came through Thailand and then ended up all over the place. But she was in that community for like 15 out of the 18 months of her mission,
Wow.
um, which is another story in and of itself. But yeah, so she got home, I got home, winter hit, and I was walking around campus just shivering all the time with three coats on, and she's walking around with a sweater, and she's
Yeah.
just fine because she's been in Minnesota, I've been in Brazil. Um, and then yeah, after that, so finished school, studied supply chain management at BYU. And then we moved to Phoenix for me for work for about 4 years. And then after 4 years in Phoenix, we wanted to be closer to family, but not too close. And
Yeah.
so ended up here in St. George.
Cool. Good. So what else has brought you to where you're at now?
Yeah. So on a spiritual note, I kind of one thing my aunt told me one time about her testimony. She said people would always ask her, do you know? How do you know? How do you know that you know? And she said, well, one time I remember praying and saying, Heavenly Father, please tell me if the church is true. I know it's true, but please tell me. And she said she stopped herself and was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it, and that's kind of when the spirit hit her. And I think it's similar for me. Like I never doubted growing up. I grew up with just an excellent family. I want to say I was like seventh generation Elder Harmer, and
Yeah. Yeah.
family goes back to Nauvoo and Kirtland on both sides, all the way back, and just really powerful legacies of faith there. Grandparents served missions, senior missions, and things. And anyway, so yeah, never really had a doubt. I kind of look at a testimony in three ways. This is from an EFY lesson when I was a teenager. They talked about there being three facets of a testimony. You have your intellectual, spiritual, and then kind of your physical testimony, or the things you do. So summed it up as head, heart, and hands. And so I've always felt like I've had a really strong intellectual testimony of the gospel. I think I credit a lot of that to reading the Work and the Glory books as a young teenager and stuff like that, where I did kind of dive into church history at that level, and enjoyed studying those parts of it. For me, the spiritual side was always a little bit of the challenge of, okay, what do I feel though? And that's again just throughout my life, like I'm definitely more intellectual than a feelings person. So for me, getting that feelings testimony was, I went to Nauvoo when I was about 15 years old, and went into a grove of trees just below the temple, and talked a little bit about is where the transfiguration of Brigham Young happened. And they had lots of general conferences right there and things. And anyway, we split up. My dad said, take some time. And so I went out and knelt down and prayed. And that was kind of where I received my first spiritual witness of the gospel. And so I can look back on that. I think that's really important to look back at those spiritual experiences. C.S. Lewis talks about it. I think it was in Mere Christianity, but he says you can't live your life looking back at the most recent, or at your most recent feast, right? You have to have that daily bread. Um, he said it is, it's fun to talk about, oh, Thanksgiving we ate this, or whatever special meal that you have. So it's important to remember those, but you also have to have that daily bread. And so, I like that comparison to having spiritual experiences, that, yeah, you're going to have the occasional really powerful experience, but most of the time it's just plugging along on the day-to-day stuff. So yeah, kind of spiritually, that's what I had gone through. One of the bigger challenges for me growing up came from my parents were divorced when I was 7, and so that impacts me today still. It's something that
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't think about, kind of the impact on kids. And the biggest blessing for me is that they both stayed super strong in the church, rock solid there, and have both remarried, and love my stepmom and my stepdad as well. And everything has worked out as well as it can. Obviously, again, there are so many challenges with that, and um, that's kind of that's been my, I don't know, the biggest challenge that I feel like I faced as a teenager, was dealing with that.
Yeah. So I want to fast forward to right now. How does that impact your decisions and things you do with your wife now? I mean, nobody gets married saying, we're just going to stay married for like 10, 15 years
Yeah,
and then we're going to get divorced. So it's not like you plan that is the outcome,
yeah,
but knowing as you do that your parents did get divorced, and my parents got divorced just before I came home from my mission. So I know that breakup happens. How do you manage and think and talk about that right now? And what are your thoughts about that? I mean, in 10 years, it's possible that you could get divorced even though you have no intention of doing it right now. So, you know, it because it impacted you then and it's still impacting you. What are your thoughts about it now?
Yeah. Um, so I really thought growing up always that I will I'm going to date my wife for years and years and years before really getting married before, because I don't want to risk any divorce or anything like that. And it was really interesting. It was definitely a spiritual thing for me as we dated after our missions, um, kind of realizing no, I feel like I learned at some point, probably in the high school, like soulmates, it's not really a thing, right? Pick somebody who you can both strive together to draw closer to our Heavenly Father, right? Um, and so yeah, find somebody you love who's on the same team as you, and you can make it work. And so yeah, that's kind of, I guess, as I'm thinking about, yeah, when I was going to thinking about getting married, that was when I thought, oh, I always thought I would date for years and years and years, but I don't need to do that now. And so that I've definitely interpreted that as a spiritual prompting. I had always struggled growing up with the song "Families Can Be Together Forever," singing that in primary and everywhere else. It was on my mission that I finally sang it one time in a little branch in Brazil, and it hit me that okay, yeah, my parents, my family, siblings, that's a different situation, but my family, my future wife, kids, like that's up to me, and that's something I can control. And so that really shifted again from that song, and kind of okay, this is my mindset: is I can make my family what I want it to be. Um, and anyway, so yeah, things that I do now. Um, One thing, every night we read a chapter in the scriptures and pray before going to bed, and that's even if it's been a rough day and we're upset with each other. Like we just do that. That's every single night. And I think that's a powerful thing, because again, it kind of refocuses, like, okay, even though I'm upset that you did this, or you're upset that I did this, we're going to come together and say, okay, we're going to read the scriptures and connect with Heavenly Father. And usually everything's fine in the morning because we were just tired because we have so many kids running around. So that's one thing I always give out as advice, is just make sure you remember what's important. Um, we try to have date nights and stuff like that. We have a lot of shared hobbies. A lot of them are outdoor stuff: rock climbing, mountain biking, playing tennis, and a lot of those are hard to do with young kids. And so that's definitely been a challenge. I think over the last couple of years, I definitely look forward as my kids get older to be able to do those things with them, and for them to be good babysitters so I can go with my favorite climbing partner, which is my wife.
Yeah, that's good. So you had a faith remodel. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so probably 2018, 2019, I really got into Twitter, which is probably my biggest guilty pleasure.
Yes, I feel you, my friend.
It's yeah, I love Twitter. I hate Twitter. I love it though. I had started using back in college. Basically had one friend, and we would basically just tweet at each other and say dumb stuff. But then kind of got a little bit into the political scene. I think everybody did around 2016, 2018, 2019. And without diving into that, I just felt like Twitter was a place where you could see unfiltered, uncensored news and kind of see what the world was really like. And with that, LDS Twitter is its own just wild, wild west. And so I was
Yeah.
never very active there. I eventually deleted my original account from when I was in college, because I thought, I'm sure there's stuff in there that could get me canceled.
Yeah.
Always worked for employers who would not hesitate to fire me for something I tweeted in 2011. And so I deleted the account, and then uh, last year or so I've kind of gotten back into it, but and tried to post more rather than just consume. Um, but yeah, so Faith Remodel, I came across some of the stuff that you see online, the CES letter and all that, all these people trying to just tear down faith. And I remember um, it wasn't. I definitely it was never a remodel as far as actions or anything like that, but it was the first time I ever was like, what if it's not Like, what if all these things that I've believed my whole life, what if everything I've studied and all the books I've read and everything, what if these things are not true? Or, what would that mean? And I remember looking at
Yeah.
the CES letter and a takedown of it at the same time, right? I think the issue people run into is they look at one-sided garbage and don't look at both sides. So I remember glancing through that and coming across early on some of the complaints about Joseph Smith stealing names from the Bible, or stealing names from the Bible uh, as plagiarism, right? He plagiarized,
Yeah.
and one of them was Jerusalem, and I was like, well, seriously, they're going to put in this book that the Book of Mormon is not true because Joseph used the name Jerusalem in the Americas? Like, they came from Jerusalem. They would have used the name Jerusalem to rename a
Yeah.
city. Like, how stupid is that? We have New York, we have New Jersey. Anyway, that was one where I was just like, okay, these guys they're not good faith actors. They are dishonest and anyway, so it kind of, I think over the course of a couple of months, I really dived into some of both sides, but also just kind of learned about the apologetic scene and got really interested in that. Read a bunch of stuff from Fair. I started listening to podcasts probably around then too.
Mm-hmm.
Got into a lot of those and then probably 2020, I read Temple and Cosmos by Hugh Nibley. And for me, the temple had always been, well, it's nice to go there and feel peaceful and escape the world, but really didn't understand anything. And then to read that book, it was suddenly like, whoa, it was like seeing the Matrix.
Yeah. Yep.
And I, dived into a lot of Nibley stuff, just lots of interesting ideas. And for me, that was like kind of a way to solidify my testimony. Like, okay, the way the temple works, the ancient history of the biblical temple and pre-biblical temple and everything, like, there's no way Joseph Smith made that stuff up. So again, I look at it intellectually, but then also on the spiritual side, just remembering the strong spiritual experiences I've had throughout my life. Anyway, so kind of that, I call it faith. It definitely wasn't a faith crisis or anything, but there were a few weeks or even months where I was like, okay, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? And now I feel like I come back at it with, okay, I can lay it all out and say, this is why I believe on the spiritual level, on the intellectual level. And frankly, to that point, I hadn't done much as far as like service in the church. When I was at BYU, our calling was ward choir member.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Moved down to Phoenix, and we were primary teachers for a few years, like all young couples are, and that was a blast. When we moved up here to St. George, I kind of felt a little bit guilty almost. Like, well, I know, having lived in Brazil, there's so many areas that just need a good, strong family. And if I'm moving to St. George, like, am I just running away from what Heavenly Father needs me to do? And my reason for moving here was pretty much closer to family and wanted to be here in the outdoors. So it's kind of selfish. I'm like, I feel a little bit guilty about that. But then when we moved into this ward, I got put in with the priest quorum, and that was just the best calling ever. It was so fun. Being able to,
All right. Well,
yeah,
let's pause for just a second because I want to go back to the faith remodel
yeah,
because you you said I started questioning all these things that I've been learning for you were like 25 at the time,
yeah,
the last 25 or so years, all the stuff that you've been taught. And it's so funny how Satan works with that. The one little doubt
hmm,
can come in and make you forget the probably thousands at that point of different experiences that you had that affirmed the gospel is true.
yeah.
And one or two little doubts can then make you say, oh, maybe it's not. How do you reconcile that in your mind, and how do you think about that at this point?
Yeah, so I was listening to an interview this last week with Alex O'Connor and Jacob Hansen from Thoughtful Faith. Alex O'Connor is a big, big name atheist with a million YouTube subscribers, and he interviewed a member of the church. And Alex O'Connor, as he's looking at it, he kind of looked at it from if there's a fly in the, what's the line? A fly in the, the ointment, right? There's a fly in the ointment or whatever, anyway, something like that.
Yeah, that's the right one.
Yeah,
Fly
if
in the
there's a
ointment.
fly in the ointment, or I'd say like a fly in the soup, right? If there's a fly in the soup, then I don't want to drink the soup. Um, I think that's one way to look at it. I like Jacob gave an explanation of, okay, if I hand you this pill and say, take this pill, it will make you infinitely happy for the rest of forever. And you say, oh, where'd you get it? And you say, oh, an angel gave it to me. You're going to go, ha, get out of here, weirdo. But if a ton of people start taking this pill and they are infinitely happy and better people and everything, and then you say, hey, what is that? Where did you get it? And you say, oh, an angel gave it to me. Then you're going to go, okay, hang on, this might be interesting. So it's almost, if you're going to look at it and say, well, there's one fly in the ointment, then, and I'm not going to take the ointment, you also have to look at it from the flip perspective of, okay, I look at something like Nahum, right, in the Book of Mormon. That's a bullseye that it is implausible that Joseph Smith made that up. Like, that is impossible. Or Mahijah from the Book of Enoch, things like that. Like, that is a dead bullseye, and it's impossible that Joseph Smith made that up. Versus you look at, let's say, something like the Book of Abraham, pages that we have from the scrolls, the parchment, right, not matching what Joseph Smith translated it as or interpreted it as. Well, it's plausible. It is entirely plausible that there were lots of other scrolls. Well, we know there were, that they matched, or that it was a different type of translation, right, rather than interpretation or whatever. Anyway, kind of looking at impossibilities versus plausibilities, possible versus plausible. I don't know if that makes sense. So kind of look at that of looking for, okay, if I find something that is absolutely impossible versus implausible, let's say, you say there are no horses in the Book of Mormon, for example. Okay, well, the only way to say that it's impossible is to excavate all of the Americas, right? So that will never be proven. Now, it can be unlikely, but to find something like, for Joseph Smith to guess Nahum, that is as near as impossible as I can say. Like, it wasn't known until the 1940s or whatever it was, or 70s. Anyway, like, you just can't guess something like that. And so anyway, that's where I kind of looked at that fly in the ointment. It's like, well, also you have to look if there's one just dead bullseye. Like, how is that possible? Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that idea, because we all know that Joseph Smith wasn't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the reason why he got Moroni to visit him was because he was repenting of his imperfection, right? So it's not like he was, or that any of us think that he was some perfect person who totally understood the beginning from the end in the very moment that God appeared to him. No, none of us believe that. And if we do, then we just don't understand his whole life,
Yeah.
And so we have to recognize that he was in the unenviable position of learning about the gospel while he was building the church. And I mean, can you even imagine how difficult that would be?
I was thinking about, can you imagine if everything you said got written down, sometimes the day of, sometimes 20 years later?
Yeah, totally.
And then we're looking at this and we're saying, well, Joseph Smith said that there were Quakers on the moon. It's like, well, okay, somebody else said that Joseph Smith mentioned the possibility of there being Quakers on the moon, which was a common belief at the time, right? We don't say that, we don't know anywhere that he said he believed that. We just say he mentioned it, right? But somebody wrote down, like, it's just, again, you almost feel bad for the antis, because we can, I say, squirrel our way out of any quote or any belief by saying, well, we don't know if he said that because it was written down by somebody else.
Yeah.
But also, you shouldn't put your faith in those things, because we don't know what he said and what he believed. Because how many times am I sitting around a campfire having really fun, deep doctrine, speculative discussions?
Yeah. And then here's the other part, that as we go through these faith remodels, which is a natural part of life that you grow and develop in your testimony, and sometimes it takes things to make you question it, and then you become more reaffirmed, or you get more questions. Everybody goes through that at some point. But the thing is, as my friend Joel told me the other day, you can take like one of these little tiny things and and say, this little thing is wrong, and it may or may not be wrong. But when you take the totality of everything, then it's like,
Yeah.
it's really difficult for you to say that there's no way that this is true, that this is 100% false. It's just, unless you are intentionally, like, that is your whole mission to prove it's false, it's really hard for anybody who's reasonable to say, yeah, you're right, this is wrong. Like, it's really difficult to make that stretch. You really have to be intentionally against it to make that stretch. Because if you're not intentionally against it and you're just curious and asking questions, then it's pretty easy to see how everything that he taught as taken as a whole is good and leads us to the right place. Yeah. And it's like the pill example you gave that I liked, which is, this pill is working, and somebody, people pass it to each other, and then somebody's like, well, where did this actually come from? Like, what doctor invented this? Well, it was an angel that showed up and gave it to someone. And you're like, oh, well, then you're going to reject it because of that, but you've seen the fruit of it in all these other places. It's just really hard for that to make sense in my mind.
Well, and we analyze the pill, and it's scientifically impossible, right? That's the thing is, okay, well, somehow it must, a Big Bang must have invented the pill. It's like, okay, you just re-engineered God. Good, congratulations.
Yeah. Which is even harder to believe. Speaking of LDS Twitter, I saw a meme the other day that had Jesus Christ appearing from the tomb, and somebody saying, there's no way this is possible. And then it had somebody else saying, after the earth cooled for trillions of years, a lightning bolt struck a pool of amino acids, and then life was created. And the person's like rejoicing that that's right. And it's like, wait a minute. That doesn't make any sense either.
We all believe in miracles. It's funny to, you either say there was an unmoved mover that created everything at the beginning, or you name it God, right? The question is, does he interact with us? And that's where your personal spiritual experiences and the miracles that you've seen or that you've heard from others or read from others, that's where that's so important.
Yeah, which is a good segue back to you being called to the Young Men's when you moved to St. George. Finish that story.
Yeah. So I think after having spent a lot of time on Twitter and I just kind of felt like, man, this next generation is just hosed. They're eating Tide Pods. They are doing some weird stuff out there, and then suddenly getting to know these actual 15 to 18-year-old boys, I was like, no, these guys they're experiencing things that, like, they're going through challenges that I never had to deal with as a teenager, which is crazy because that was 10 years prior. Things like talking to them all the time, I'd be like, hey, when the bishop here, when he was in high school, if he wanted pornography, he had to go find a magazine somewhere. Like for me, it was, okay, I would need to go search things on the computer and find, whatever. Like for you guys, it is crammed down your social media feed every single day. Like it's kind of, you had to actively seek it back in the day. Then it was kind of accessible, but you had to go seek it. And now it's crammed down people's throats all day long, every day. And so, man, the things that they're facing. Also, good is evil and evil is good. That's true today, man, where we look at the world and the world says, no, this is evil, this is good, and it's completely opposite of what's true. Again, I feel like even when I was in high school, it was not that way. Good was still good, evil was still evil. And so anyway, getting to know these young men, I was just blown away by how impressive they were spiritually. And it was really good for me, a lot of fun to be able to start teaching again, teaching those classes and ministering to them as I took them rock climbing or camping or whatever else. And then after...
And real quick, Jake, these experiences of being out in the world with the boys is so powerful and gives you a way to connect with them away from the distractions that happen even in church every Sunday, being able to be out and about and seeing and living in God's creations and like literally climbing a rock that God created for our use. That's those are pretty amazing things. And again, hard to argue against the beauty of God's creations when you're
Yeah.
literally out there enjoying it.
Yeah, I joke with, so I basically got, probably by now it's like 6 or 7 of them, but originally 1 or 2 of them really to get into climbing because I needed a climbing partner. And so, and now they're both, those first 2 are both out on missions, and it's a bummer because you can't climb anymore, but it's awesome, so fun to see them go. And
That's
but I always
great.
joked with them, like sometimes you're climbing and you're just shaking. We have what's called a sewing machine leg when you're, I don't know, the tendons are just so tense and you're standing on a tiny little hold that your whole leg just starts going back and forth and back and forth. You can't control it. And then you'll reach up and sometimes there's just the perfect little hold. I'm like, that right there, that is evidence of God.
Yeah, that's
Some of
awesome.
these holds, I'm like, that's not nature. Come on. Like somebody put that there. But yeah, so anyway, I really liked working with the young men. It kind of restored my faith in humanity and the next generation and everything. And then after about a year of that, I got called in to meet with the stake president one day, and they called me to be on the high council, and I was like,
Come
uh,
on.
yeah. As soon as I walked out of there, the bishop called me, and he's like, "I'm so sorry. I really wanted to keep you, but the stake president said." I'm like, well, okay, I don't even know what the High Council is, what it does. Like, I told him, like, I know I'm supposed to tell everyone that the stake presidency loves them, and I'm supposed to give a boring talk once a month.
There you go.
And
Check,
so,
check.
yeah, so that was it also felt like, oh, that's the end of my youth. Like, will I ever go back to the primary to teach? But I miss those days, right? Yeah, kind of the death of my youth. Um, but it was also it was so good for me. I don't know that I did anything that helped anybody while I was in the High Council, but it was so fun for me to, or so good for me to be part of ward councils again. I hadn't done that since my mission, right? To be part of stake High Council meetings and things like that, just to see kind of behind the scenes how the church actually works. So amazing just to see all the ministering that's going on within a ward behind the scenes. I had an experience a few months ago where a neighbor passed away, and went over to the hospital, or he had a stroke. Went over to the hospital and get there, and there are 4 other guys from the elders quorum there, just ready to give a blessing and care about this guy, and just, yeah, the church is good. And so I guess where I was kind of going with this is I had the spiritual witness, I had the intellectual witness. I felt like I hadn't done much with, so head, heart, hands, right? What can I do in the gospel? Because you do need all 3 of those to be balanced. And so for me, yeah, kind of working with the young men and the high council. So I did that for not quite a year, and then reorganized the bishopric, and I got pulled in as the second counselor. So I got my wish to be back with the young men, but also a lot more busy.
Yeah, yeah.
um, anyway, it's just, yeah, it's been great to kind of be back to focus on doing the gospel, living the gospel, and teaching the gospel. It's still kind of funny, like, as I think about it, I've never taught an elders quorum lesson. I've never taught an adult Sunday school class, which is funny, just kind of how that works. But yeah, it's been really good for me to develop and gain that testimony of the hands aspect of the gospel, right? That it really does work in people's lives. And I think so often, as I was talking with the boys, I'm always telling them, like, look at Hollywood. These people have everything that society says they should want. Is anyone in Hollywood happy? Do any of them actually have joy? Like, look at them. None of them are actually happy. They have everything the world says that they should have, and they're not happy. I'm like, who's happy? I'm happy. Look around the ward. Like, these people are happy. And so I think, yeah, why don't give the people a reason to interrupt their rejoicing, right? Like, is it Korihor says to Alma, or Alma says to Korihor, anyway, or one of the Antichrist in the Book of Mormon. So I think about that a lot. Like, the gospel, this is the plan of happiness. This is how to be happy in this life, not just how to achieve exaltation.
Yeah, yeah, that's really powerful. So, so these things, they've brought you to this place spiritually. You've served in the church. You've gained a testimony intellectually and emotionally, and that's all good. Um, what about your work life and your day to day, like providing for your family and that piece? Anything there that you want to touch on?
Yeah. So, um, I never really knew what I wanted to do as a career. I was always really good in school. School was easy for me. Um, when I was headed home from my mission, the last few months, I was supposed to sign up for classes, and I just told my dad to sign me up. Like, I don't want to think about this right now, so just find me some classes and sign me up. And so he went and met with one of the guidance counselors, and they suggested supply chain management, which I didn't know what that was, but I was like, okay, sure. Has
And
100%.
what a strange thing to suggest. There had to be a reason why that was suggested, because that sounds like a very uh no offense, boring type of job to get into.
Yeah,
So,
so it was 100% job placement, I think is why my dad picked it. But also, I had worked in a warehouse through high school,
okay.
and my first year at BYU, I worked in the warehouse there, Central Stores, and so I had
Okay.
kind of that that background of understanding logistics a little bit. Um, it was in the business school. I had been very interested in statistics, and then kind of got that drilled out of me my freshman year at BYU when I signed up
Hmm.
for a higher level statistics class, and it was not a good experience.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was kind of, I liked the math, I liked the interpersonal stuff too. And so supply chain actually was a perfect fit. It was really funny. I didn't know what it was, but it ended up
Yeah.
really, yeah, being a good fit for me, matched my skill set, matched my interests and things. So,
Well, and I want to take a second here, because this is something that is so powerful, that people who have people who love them, those people who love you can see things that you can't necessarily see. And your dad, I'm sure, was not just like, well, what can I do to just get him registered for classes and then
yeah.
I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm sure that he was like, what could I do to help him like find a major that will, one, provide for his family, and two, something that he'll be good at and will actually care about. And the reason why I know that is because I have my own kids,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I try to do things that help them. But also when I'm working with the youth or other people, I am like trying to really understand who they are
hmm
so that I can give them the kind of advice that's going to be beneficial. So, anything else you want to add about that, with your dad looking out for you like that?
Yeah, no, it was just interesting because it did match my skill set and my interests without me even knowing what it was. Um, and so I'm very grateful for that. I don't know if he prayed and went to the temple trying to figure out what to sign me up for, or if it was just a guidance counselor that was like, "Hey, everybody gets a job if you do this major." um, I knowing my dad, I'm sure it was the former, but yeah, it's interesting. I also looked at a lot of. There's a quote from Boyd K. Packer, I think, that said, "Do you think the Lord cares if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a bricklayer, a landscaper, or whatever?" He goes, "He doesn't care. He just wants you to be the best, whatever you are." And so again, it kind of. I feel like growing up, I had some mindset of, okay, you need to pick the perfect path. You need to pick your soulmate. You need to pick your uh, the career that you're supposed to be in and everything. And it kind of showed me like, no, there are lots of different ways to be on the path, right? Anyway, so I studied that through the 4 years of school, and then got a job with an aerospace company and worked there for 4 years, and then switched over to a healthcare company now. Um, Still doing supply chain management. It's not it's not my something I want to be for the rest of my life. I don't feel like I derive that much meaning, and like I probably shouldn't put this on the internet. I don't know that I see myself there in 10 years.
Yeah.
um,
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing to bring up, because a lot of times it's hard, especially today, to stay in the same job for 10
yeah,
years. And especially today, people will change careers and jobs more
yep,
than they have in the past. And so, you know, the uh, for me, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is, how do you how do you set up your situation in your company, or as an employer or an employee, to make it so that people feel comfortable growing even beyond what you have there to offer. And that's a touchy thing, because we all know that the job is going to end at some point,
yeah,
right? And yet we pretend like it's a forever thing, and it just
Yeah.
isn't,
Well,
But we often act like it is.
yeah, I think my dad and my father-in-law have both been in the same career. I did, lots of different roles, but same company their entire careers, essentially. And I'm already on a third company I've worked for since school, and so I've done some entrepreneurial stuff as well. Coming out of school, I bought a bunch of rock climbing equipment from China and sold it locally and on the internet. And I felt like had I committed to this right at the beginning, it would have worked out. I made some money, but it was a good experiment. It was fun. Had I actually committed right at the beginning and thrown some money into it, I think it would have led somewhere. Instead, it flamed out as soon as there were other copycats, right? Um, and then I did a website, like a blog, essentially for a couple of years. Me and my wife started. I did one on rock climbing, canyoneering, um, information, and ran ads on that and Amazon affiliates. And my wife is a dietitian, and so she did one kind of on teenage sports nutrition. And we got those up to they paid for our mortgage 1 month, and then
Wow, that's awesome.
AI came out. Like
Ah,
literally the next month, ChatGPT was announced. This is probably October 2020, what 2021? I can't remember exactly.
2022.
2022. Yeah. ChatGPT came out, and immediately our traffic fell by to 10% of what it was. I mean, it was just crazy. We just got killed. And so, we still have the sites, but now they bring in like not even $100 a month. And so we kind of haven't
Wow.
touched them for a few years. So then on to the next thing. So uh, yeah, so then I decided I'll use AI to make some money instead of lose some money. And
Yeah.
so this is 2023. Well, so for a couple of years, I've wanted a way to share family history stories with my kids.
Hmm.
I grew up hearing a bunch from both my grandparents. My grandpas on both sides are really into family history, and so I get to hear stories about the great grandpa who rode in the cavalry in World War One and was promised by I think it was Ezra Taft Benson, and that his group of boys from his ward, if none of them did anything that would embarrass their mothers, they would all come home alive.
Hmm.
Or my fifth grade grandpa, Edward Bunker, led a handcart company across the plains. Anyway, I've heard these stories growing up, and I want a way to share them with my kids. And so I was looking at ways to create children's books out of those stories. Um, and so, because I don't know, a lot of the books that I read to my kids are just fluff, it's kind of pointless.
Hmm.
So yeah, that kind of had that idea, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna pay a family member who's an artist to make a book, and it just didn't work out. Like it was going to be incredibly expensive, even with the family discount, and it was going to take forever. Okay, maybe it's doable for one book, but I wanted a library about my ancestors, right?
Yeah.
And so then I thought, well, maybe I can learn how to draw, and I tried that for a minute, and I was never going to get anywhere where I could do anything that
Yeah.
mattered, anything that I was not embarrassed to show people. And so then October, November 2023 is when Dolly came out as the first AI image generator. And I was like, oh, that is the answer that I've been waiting for. Suddenly, if I'm writing a book about Joseph Smith, yeah, I can sell enough copies that I can probably make that worth it to pay an artist. But if I'm selling a book about, you know, Lowell Bud Duncombe, my great great grandfather, I'm never going to sell enough copies to make that worth it. And so anyway, I went and tried the tools and they were terrible. And I was getting, animals, horses with 6 legs or 2 legs, or, could not get a face to look like a human and things like that. I'm like, okay, it's not there yet, but this is the answer. And so fast forward a year, that's when it finally kind of got to the point where, yeah, people look like people and you can erase the extra leg on the horse and, and whatever else. And so, yeah, kind of on the entrepreneurial side of things, that's when I started making these children's books. And so I made the first 4 or 5 about some of my ancestors that I'm very proud of and have inspired me. And I've shared those stories with my kids. And then went to Roots Tech, the church's big family history conference last February. And set up a booth there and got started there. And so that's been a side gig for the last year. We've done about 40 children's books now. Most of them are pioneers because that's who people care about and their ancestors. Lots of World War II stories, things like that. But that's been super fun. Yeah, it's funny. I'll work my day job, and then in the evenings, I'm working on writing books and generating and editing and cleaning up pictures and things. And I totally enjoy that. Just, I would need to sell 10 times as many to even think about stepping away from my day job.
Well, and the thing that's so amazing about this, this is familyhistorystorybooks.com, by the
Yeah.
way. Since you're not promoting it, I will. I think the idea is just great, and surely with AI tools, there will probably be copycats like there were with the mountain climbing gear that
Yeah. Yeah.
you'll have people come in and say, "Oh, I can do this too," and that may be the case. However, what is really cool is you're actually doing it, and you've got several books that have been published, and then they get print on demand. Is that right?
Yep.
That they just people order them and then they're printed, so you don't have these inventory issues to deal with and
Yeah.
things like that. So whoever wants one basically can get one, and then you can, when all the 150 great grandchildren of this person buy it for all their kids, then that's cool, and that'll be great. But no serious publisher would ever say, yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to do this.
Uh-huh.
It's just not going to happen. And what I like about it is that it also is this idea of the hearts of the children turning to their fathers in a different way than what we usually think about, which is we're going to go and do temple work. But I think there's something deeper to it, that it's not just about temple work, but it's also really our hearts turning to them and saying, what can we learn from them about how to
Hmm.
live this life that we're living? What would you add there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, today you don't have to look very far to find someone who has completely jettisoned, completely thrown out their ancestors, thrown them under the bus, even as recent as their parents, right? And I'm like, man, unless there are instances where, yeah, you probably should cut off your family line because they are monsters, but that's very, very rare. I mean, come on. And so I actually I have, so on my stepmom's side of my family, um, uh, one of the ancestor lines was at Hans Mill in the gunsmith shop, or in the blacksmith shop, and one of them was in the mob on the other side of the family. And so, like, again, you can, there are bad stories out there, but there's nothing that can't be redeemed through Christ's love. Anyway, so yeah, with family history, it's interesting. There's a lot of research on kids who learn their ancestor stories. So one study it was taking place. It was supposed to be a longitudinal study looking at resilience in kids, and it started, I want to say, in 2000. Um, they looked at these kids and found a way to gauge how resilient they were. And then September 11th happened, and this is kids up in the Northeast region of the U.S. And so they were able to ask the same questions and test the same kids after September 11th, and they found that the ones who it's interesting, the ones who knew some family stories, so grandparents going back, they were significantly more resilient than the ones who didn't. And so there's something there in this study, and one from BYU recently, kind of a meta study of a lot of family history studies. They found a 20% reduction in depression and anxiety in teenagers who know some of their family history or family stories, which is just fascinating. How many times in the scriptures are we told, remember, 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 remember my sons, remember, like, we just, I think we look at so many miracles, so many tender mercies in our ancestors and our parents' stories, it can be in our own life. And you have to learn those stories. They help you connect with both your past, and then I always tell my kids, I'm like, hey, if Edward Bunker can lead a handcart company of pioneers who he doesn't understand because they all speak Welsh and he's American, if he can lead a handcart company across the plains, you can unload the dishwasher. I'm like,
Yeah, that's
it's
great.
Like, I promise, if they can do what they did, like, you could do hard things too, you know. And it's, it's funny, but also, yeah, if they can handle just the crazy stuff that people had to go through in the past, then we can find the same inspiration from the miracles that we see. One thing I've thought about a lot really is with miracles. I think those kind of crossover, talk about head, heart, hands, right? Those crossover between the head and the heart. Where when you read about the boys carrying Martin and Willie Handcart companies across the Sweetwater, right? Like that's an intellectual thing. Why would they do that? Well, they had testimonies, right? And it's a spiritual thing. When you look at people being raised from the dead, people being miraculously healed, it's been super interesting writing all these children's books now. Again, yeah, we've got 40. So it's me, my brother, and my wife and his wife. So we've written 40 children's books over the last year. Probably 30 of them are pioneer stories. And it's amazing to me just how many miracles are out there. I mean, people being shot and then miraculously healed, broken legs being miraculously healed, tons of stories of the three Nephites, one of the Nephites appearing to someone and helping them for whatever reason. So these miracles, I guess the way I kind of look at it, if you want to step away from the church or step away from your testimony, you should have to, Elder Holland put it, that you have to step over the Book of Mormon, right? You have to confront the Book of Mormon as a roadblock to leaving the church or leaving your testimony, whatever. I kind of look at miracles in the same way. Like, if you want to step away from your testimony, you need to confront, okay, what actually happened then in this miraculous situation? Because scientifically that is impossible. And so how do I deal with this, right? So one example that comes to the top of my mind. So Edward Bunker, he and his family are traveling. He's in his 80s at this point, and they're traveling down to Mexico, and they're coming up on this watering hole, which he's traveling from Bunkerville, so just outside of St. George, down to Mexico. I mean, there's nothing there. It's all desert, and so you really need to find these oases. And as he's going down, he suddenly stops his family and says, "We're going to camp here tonight." And they're like, "It's 2 miles to the watering hole. Like, let's just go." And he goes, "No, we're staying here tonight." And the next morning, they get to the watering hole, and a band of Indians had come through in the night and killed everyone at the watering hole. It's like, okay, how did he know that? That's impossible for him to have known. And so what happened, right? So how do I, if I say, okay, I'm going to leave the church, leave my testimony, how do I square that? Like, what happened there? Maybe the story was made up, right? Maybe it's completely fake. Okay, why did he lie about it, right? In his journals. Another example, my great great grandmother was a convert back east in the 1880s, and they had been persecuted by mobs after joining the church. They defended missionaries with their rifles. One time they had missionaries in their home, and a mob was coming up the hill, and as they're poking kind of chinks in the cabin out of the way so they can shoot through the cabin. The missionaries say, "Hang on, let's say a prayer." They say a prayer, a storm rolls in and disperses the mob because it's a crazy rainstorm, thunder, lightning, all that. Anyway, stories like that. And then they decide to come to Utah, and they get to the train station with a group of saints. And the leader, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but one of the missionaries was returning home, and he announced to everyone, "We're not going to get on this train. It's going to crash." And so they wait and they take the next train, and they go right past the wreckage of the first train. It's like, that's impossible unless,
Yeah.
except for God, right? And
Yeah.
so, again, I think with these miraculous stories, if you want to step away from your belief in God or the church or whatever, you need to step over and find a way to square those stories, because that's impossible.
Yeah. Or just outright reject them
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and say,
you say
I
they're
just choose
liars,
to,
whatever. Yeah,
yeah, I choose to not believe any of that, which has its own problems also. So
yeah.
the
Well, and then you're just anti-history,
yeah.
anti-science, right?
Yeah. So the thing that's amazing it is you're sharing these stories that people don't know about. We know what is in the church history,
Uh-huh.
the main players, the people who played a role, the stories that did get passed on.
And Saints
Those
Saints
are
is awesome for that. If I put in a plug for
oh,
the Saints books, like,
oh
go
yeah.
read those. They are really well written, and they do a great job covering a lot of that history. But it's a drop in the bucket, right? You have, like you said, the most important or most well known players, And what's cool is if you have records from your ancestors, they're going to have miracles in there.
Yes. And that's exactly the point that I was getting to, is that every single person who has faith in Christ does for a reason and has a testimony for some reason that they have learned and can understand. And it is absolutely beautiful that those things happen to every single person who believes in Christ. And we may not know all of those stories, but they do exist. And that's part of what we're trying to do here, is to share some of those things and bring those to the forefront and help people see how God knows each of us personally, because that is really, really key to so much of this. Is there are so many stories like that moment when that you mentioned before about Brigham Young being transfigured and looking like Joseph Smith when he took over as president of the church. Well, he didn't actually take over as president of the church. That's when they said the Quorum of the 12 was in charge, and then he became the prophet later. But that thing that happened had thousands of saints there who all have their own individual story, who all went through trials and suffering and all kinds of things to be able to have the faith and testimony that they have. And as individual as every single person is, so too is their path and process to coming to Christ. And the experiences they had are unique to them and have helped them. So I want to talk about some of the ways that you know that God knows you personally. What are some of those things that have helped you learn that yourself?
Yeah. So a couple of experiences that come to mind and thought about before this call. So when I was 17, my mom remarried, and again, I don't think there's ever a divorce or remarriage or anything like that where there isn't conflict and stress and frustration and everything. And so I was, going through a lot of stuff as a teenager, jumping it right before I jumped into my senior year of high school and everything. And my mom had, I don't think I think it was the end of my junior year. So she had gone on her honeymoon, and I remember I was sitting in seminary class and it just, hit me. And I'm just sitting there just like, oh, I just gotta even care, life's so hard, poor me, whatever. And then the seminary teacher is flipping through some slides, and up pops this picture of the Savior that is hanging over my piano in my house growing up, right? So, and it's not one that I had recognized as having seen before. And so it just suddenly hit me in that moment, like, yeah, I'm here. I care about you. Like, here's proof, right? It's just, what are the odds? Again, what are the odds that that picture comes up at that moment when I'm feeling completely alone, completely rejected, whatever. And so that was a really powerful experience for me. And then another one a year later, kind of similar. I'm going through the same, just frustrations with family and feeling, alone. So I'm in my freshman year in college, and I was kneeling down. I was saying a prayer and just praying for, like, do you care? And right then my phone rings, and so I reach up and silence it. And I'm saying a prayer, dang it. And then afterwards, I pull the phone out, and I have a voicemail from a friend a friend from high school. We connected a little bit freshman year at BYU, and so I listened to the voicemail, and he's like, "Hey Jake, how are you?" Or, "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" And then he goes to ask a question about homework for a class we had together. And so it wasn't even, did he really care how I was? Was he really thinking? That's just kind of what we say. But it hit me like, okay, friend called you during the prayer to say that he's thinking about you and cares about you. Like, that's God, right? That's not my buddy here. And so that's another one that just hit me like, yes, God cares about me individually. And again, he's going to use somebody else most of the time to show that he cares.
Yeah, and you may have other experiences where an angel appears to you, or a true miracle happens, or you're forewarned of some major danger. And all those things can happen. But how are those any more miraculous than the picture confirming to you that God knows you.
Hmm.
And like it's one thing for you to see a picture that was in your house growing up, but it's another thing for you to have the spiritual awareness to know that God knows you personally and to have that impression, because it's not just that there was a picture, there was also that feeling that came
Yeah.
with it of you are known. It wasn't just the phone call, there was also the
Right.
feeling, the spiritual confirmation that came with it saying, this isn't just a phone call, this is also you being told you are loved and God knows you.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful thing, Jake.
Hmm. Well, as I think about those miracles too, again, those are small, right? Um, it's yeah. I think it's interesting. We don't experience a lot of the life saving physical miracles, I think, as our ancestors did. I think part of well, so I'm not saying they're not they're not everywhere and they don't exist, but um, how often are we facing death? Very rarely, right? And so, yeah, can I say my life's been saved by the spirit or by an angel or whatever? Okay, how often is my life actually at risk? Um, so this last year, this is a long story. I'm going to cut super short. Um,
Okay.
I went on a kayaking trip with some friends and to do the Narrows in Zion. And I had been kayaking once, and it turned out I didn't know at the time the other guys had never been whitewater kayaking. Um,
Oh, wow.
so again, long story short, I feel like the story is justified, and it sounds like puts me in a really bad light. Telling the short version, but so I ended up ahead of everybody else, and the rest of the group had spread out and dispersed, and we were kind of in a bad situation. We were running through late at night, and it was cold, and sorry, it wasn't late at night. It was getting dark and everything. I ended up, yeah, a ways ahead of everyone else. No way to contact them. I got flipped over going through a class 5 that I should have portaged if I had known it was there. Um, again, yeah, any kayaker is going to be like, you idiot. But kayak gets pinned under a tree in the middle of this class 5. I pull myself out onto a rock and I'm standing there and I realize like, whoa, suddenly, you know, it just got real here. Like I'm suddenly
Yeah.
at risk of death. Um, and so as I'm trying to figure out what to do, I start praying and I'm waiting for the next person to come. I wait for about 20 minutes and no one comes. I turn back and look and the kayak is gone. And so I'm still 5 miles from the exit. That kayak has my first aid kit, my emergency blanket, my dry clothes, my everything. And so suddenly I'm realizing, okay, now I'm in serious trouble. And right at that moment, I thought the thought came to my mind of uh, when you receive the Aaronic priesthood, you're promised the power of the ministering of angels. And growing up, I never knew what that was. Yeah, go serve some people, be nice, whatever. We're the angels. That hits me, and I'm like, yeah, I could use that right now. um, and so I knelt down and prayed, and I said, when I got the Aaronic priesthood back when I was a 12-year-old snivelly deacon, I received this, and I need that help now. Um, and I uh, got up and decided, okay, I need to go find that kayak. I don't know if anyone else is even coming. They may have stopped for the night, whatever. It's kind of every man for himself at this point. So I worked my way down, and miraculously, the kayak washed right into an eddy and was just sitting there. And
Wow.
I get to it, and again, I'm just relieved, overcome with emotion there. And then I realized my dry bag got wet, and so everything inside is wet just from being under the water that long, with the hydraulics and everything. And so I'm praying, okay, should I try and stay here and try and survive the night? It's the first week of May, so it's when we started in the morning, it was 37 degrees. Like it's not going to be a fun day if I get stuck in here, or a fun night if I get stuck in there. And so I'm praying about it, and I felt like go ahead. And from there on, yeah. So up to that point, I had flipped over in every single rapid. I would always go through the rapid, and then even if I made it, I would hit a wall right at the end, and flip over. And from then on, I didn't flip over anymore. Like I would go through these rapids, and right at the end when I needed to turn, make a 90-degree turn to get away from this wall, it was like the back of my kayak got pushed to the side and pushed me through. And I have no way to explain that. I either suddenly got really good at kayaking or ministering angels. And so for me, stepping back to the, well, anyway, some of the other guys got life flighted out. They got helicoptered out the next day and barely survived the night. And anyway, long story. But for me, it was like, okay, if I get put in a life or death situation, yes, miracles are real, angels are real. Most of my life, I'm not in those situations. Thank goodness. I was talking with one of the deacons today, and he mentioned President Nelson's story about having a gun put to his head and the gun not firing. Like, thank goodness we don't see stuff like that hardly ever, but those miracles do exist. A lot of the time, it's the smaller miracles of the voicemail on your phone or the picture that reminds me that God cares, and those are equally miraculous, but not as memorable, I guess. Wouldn't make it as good of a storybook.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so amazing also is that those situations are no less real and no less impactful, and yet they are regular occurrences. And it seems like it was a regular occurrence in the saints' early days, shortly after the church was organized, and that they were just faced with that every single day, it seemed, and miracle upon miracle of them being saved. But it still happens that people don't get saved, right?
Right.
That people do die. And that doesn't mean that God wasn't with them, or that there wasn't a miracle in their death that we don't know about. But the thing is that no matter how big or small, God still knows you and still is looking out for you. And sometimes we go through things and we're like, I don't see at all how this is a blessing or a miracle, until several years later, and then we're like, oh, that was really good. I'm glad I went through that trial so that I could experience this and now be able to share what it was. And there's no miraculous saving or anything like that happening. But there is still some sort of miracle. And sometimes those things come from experience, and sometimes those things come from true miracles that you see. And sometimes it's some variation of that, Yeah. And that's what's so beautiful, is that you get this knowledge from the Spirit saying, this is why this happened to you. But it doesn't come right away. But, years later it may come. And I've had several experiences in my life where I'm like, that was a terrible experience. I have no idea why that happened. And then years later, it's like, oh, this is why that thing happened. This is why I went through that trial, so that I can now comfort someone in the trial they're going through. Okay, that makes sense. I wish I wouldn't have had to go through that trial because it really stunk.
Yeah.
But it feels so good to be able to bless someone else's life right now.
Yeah, and that's one thing with parents' divorce and that whole situation. Just recently, as I've been able to serve and get to know more of the youth, I've been able to bear that testimony to some of the youth who are going through the same thing right now. And that is one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. Sitting there telling this a teenager that, hey, I just want you to know I've been there, and it's terrible, it sucks, but God knows you and cares about you, and you'll get through it. And just to be able to say that I know that I've been there really, I think makes a difference. And I see you, right? And God sees you. That's where I'm grateful for like you said, grateful for the experience. I'd never pick it for myself, but I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, for sure. So was that story the desert island story by the chance?
Oh no. So that kind of.
All right, let's hear the desert island
Well,
story.
this is, I probably should have mentioned this early on. One one of my former employer's friends said to me was, just as I was talking about like growing up, I just tried to do what was right. He told my dad one time, he's like, Jake's the kind of guy who, if you were to put him on a desert island, no one else is there, like he'll still get up every morning and read his scriptures and exercise. Like, and it's just, yeah. Again, I'm grateful for the routines, grateful for my parents kind of drilling that into me. But um, I yeah try and do what's right, and I feel like as I've gotten older, I've been able to see like you're not just doing it to jump through hoops. You're doing it because it makes you who you are supposed to become. I was sharing this with the deacons a couple of weeks ago. A couple of them are pretty sure they're going to be in the NFL. And so I talked to them. I'm like, okay, what do you think if you could meet with an NFL coach right now and he were to tell you, here are the things that you need to do if you want to be in the NFL? You know, check these boxes. Like, what is he going to tell you? It's like, well, lift and eat well and sleep well and study the game and avoid sketchy girls and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Have really good genetics.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
make sure your dad's a college football player, whatever. Um, and I'm telling you, I'm like, what's interesting is you look at those as, okay, I'm going to check these boxes. It's like, what's happening? You're not qualifying yourself to be in the NFL. You are turning yourself into an NFL player, right? And so as I look at the commandments that God's given us, it's not, okay, jump through these hoops and then I'll let you in. It's no, if you do these things, you will become like me. You'll become what I want you to be or what you can become. And I think that's one thing that just I never understood for a long time, and is very misunderstood in the church. I think a lot of people look at it like, uh, yeah, God wants us to jump through these hoops and check the boxes. No, he wants you to turn into something. He wants you to become like him, and so he's showing us how to do that, um, which is awesome. Yeah, again, it's the path is the plan of happiness because it shows you how to be happy now, not just someday you'll be rewarded.
Hmm. Yeah. And that really is what we're asked to do is become like Christ. We are not asked to do something different than that. That's
Hmm.
why the primary answers that we so often give of reading the scriptures, going to church, going to the temple, saying our prayers, like that kind of stuff, it really does matter
Yeah,
because when you do those on a daily basis, then it transforms who you are. It truly does. That's not just lip service. That's not just, oh, it'd be nice. But it's really hard to stay the same person when you are daily striving to improve yourself.
yeah.
Like you
I
got to work at it.
I've always thought to myself, like, no one ever leaves the church who has a daily scripture study habit. That you quit that at, at a certain point before you're going to just up and leave. Like, as you're doing those things, you are drawing closer to Christ. And it's when you step away and get out of the habit or whatever, that's when you notice the difference. I remember as a teenager, um, kind of having picking up my habit of scripture study or whatever. And I remember several days where I'd be like, man, it comes 11 o'clock or whatever, I'm in school, I'm just like, today is just not going well. And then I'd realize, oh yeah, I slept in and didn't read scriptures this morning. And I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. And so that's another thing I've been able to testify to the deacons is, hey guys, read your scriptures every day. I don't care if it's a verse, like open the book and you'll notice your day will go different. I promise. And it's been cool. A couple of them have picked up that habit now, and they're bearing their testimony to the other boys in the quorum saying, yeah, I'm reading my scriptures every day now, and I really have noticed that it's made me more optimistic and happier and whatever else. And I'm like, yes, that's what it is. That's what it's all about. And again, opening and reading a few words out of any other book is not going to do it for you. It's this, you open the scriptures, read the Book of Mormon. It does not make sense. It's impossible. And yet here we are.
Yeah, so true. So you're with these deacons now. So what it let's imagine that you were that deacon. What advice would you give yourself, knowing what your life is like, what you're going to become, what is going to happen over the next almost 20 years? What advice would you give to yourself as a deacon now?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a lot of the primary answers. God knows you, he cares about you. I think look at what the world has to offer and look at the people who go down that path and see if that's who you want to be. Um, uh, Jordan Peterson talks about future authoring, kind of a course that is taught to college freshmen, and they basically spend a few hours journaling about what they want to be in 5 years. And I can't remember the stats, but it's like anyone who takes that course, they're 50% less likely to drop out. And so I think the idea there is if you have a plan in mind, if I'm talking to these 12-year-olds and I say, when you're 25, where do you want to be? We talk about this being a decade never to be forgotten. Like for these 12-year-olds, they are going to sink or swim in the next 10 years. The next 10 years are huge for them. It's where they're going to develop strong testimonies and figure out what they want to do in their lives, go on missions, get married, start a career. Like that's the next decade, a little bit more for them. And so I just think it's super important to have that goal of, okay, who do I want to be when I'm 25? And then just to keep that in the front of your mind. I do find that to be a little bit harder. I think at my 31 to 41, I'm like, who do I want to be in 10 years? I don't know. But I did everything I wanted to from 15 to 25, right? I went on the mission. I married my wife, started having kids, did my career, graduated college, all that. And this is shifting into another topic, I guess. But yeah, what are the next 10 years? It's not laid out as clearly as it is when you're 12.
Yeah, like you have so many fewer life milestones to go through
Mm-hmm.
um, as you get older that it's so interesting because when you're young and like 12 or 13, you're thinking like this is the next thing that I got to get to, this is the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I had this problem when I was that age where I was like, oh, I can't wait until I
Yeah.
can drive and then
Yeah.
I can do this, or I can date and then I can do this, or I can graduate from high school, or can't wait till I go on a mission and all that. And I realized like that was a terrible way to live my life because I was never aware of what was happening then. I was always looking forward to something, and it took me a long time to figure it out. But it was probably like my early 20s where I was like, I need to just be okay with where I'm at and not be so anxious about looking forward to the future. And I want to take a different approach to that. And it took me really until now being 43 to saying I actually don't care so much about the future. I'm still going to work and have goals and strive for certain things, but I'm not going to say I can't wait for my kids to be a certain age
Mm-hmm.
or grow a certain amount or whatever. I'm going to enjoy the moment as much as I can. And and that has really helped a ton because I didn't do that for a lot of my life and I feel like I missed out on opportunities that I wish I wouldn't have missed out on.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I'd like to ask is in the last year, what's the greatest lesson that you've learned?
Oh, greatest lesson I've learned in the last year. I that the experience in the Narrows, that was life changing for me. Absolutely. I think a brush with death. Uh, Again, it gave me another this is impossible and yet it happened. Therefore, angels are real, right? Um, and it's changed my mindset in a lot of things, just as far as the outdoors and preparedness and things like that. Made me realize I'm mortal. But aside from that, so serving the bishopric has been just awesome for me to get to feel God's love for the people in the ward. We've only lived here 3 years, and I feel like most of the people in the ward have been here 20 plus years, and so it's interesting. Also, I'm one of the youngest people in the ward. Uh, Up until a few months ago, like we had our youngest is 2.5, and she was the most recent baby born in the ward until
Wow.
about 2 months ago. And so it is definitely an older ward, and so it's an interesting dynamic for me being the 31-year-old in the bishopric, and most people are like, "Oh yeah, I have grandkids your age." um, but it's been just awesome getting to feel God's love for the people in the ward. Again, I'm not a very emotional person just by nature, and so uh, it's been neat to feel that kind of expand in my heart to feel that love for these people who I don't really particularly know and would have no other reason to care about. It's really neat. I think I define charity as loving everybody, even those you don't like.
Yeah, I like that.
That's yeah, you feel God's love, and I talk about that with my kids or about my kids all the time. I'm like, oh, I sure love him even when I don't like him,
Yeah,
especially my
that's very
4-year-old.
true.
But
Yeah. Okay, so let's shift toward looking forward. Um, there are a few different things that we can talk about here, but the first one is like what are you thinking is going to be important for you in the next 10 years?
yeah, so 10 years from now, I'll be done having kids. My oldest will be a teenager. I think I'm terrified for that. Um, yeah, like very terrified for that. Even though I've now seen that teenagers can be good, I'm nervous to have a teenage daughter.
Yeah.
um,
And she's 5 right now, is that
she's
right?
6. Yeah, she'll be
6.
7
Okay.
next month. So again, she's 17 when we finish this.
Yeah. Wow, that's
um,
awesome.
yeah, raising teenagers. What does that mean? How do I avoid the pitfalls? I'm always looking around and saying, okay, this is a really good family with a kid that's just gone off the rockers. And yes, there's some level of nature, but also I really hope a lot of it's nurture, so that I can hopefully be good at it. And who knows? There are definitely amazing families that put out some black sheep, some bad eggs. And I hope not to have any of that, and we're obviously going to do our best to avoid any of that, with the understanding that it does happen. I think professionally, oh
Before you
yeah,
go on, I just gotta say about the teenagers, I've been looking forward to having teenagers my whole life.
really,
They, yes, they are the best. I was not scared of it at all, and I'm still not. My youngest is 13, um, so I'll give you a little unsolicited
please,
advice
yeah,
that has really helped me.
and keep giving it to me
Um,
every year.
yeah, no kidding. So the way that we did it and the way that I've seen successful families do it, because I was a school principal
Yeah,
before, and so I saw a lot of people and how they raise their kids and the way they talk to them and stuff and how they convince them to do things they didn't want to do, and all this stuff. And what what I have learned are two really important things. The first is we need to follow God's path and give kids choice. Like, we need to let them make their own decisions and then suffer the consequences, because that's what God does for us. And he also forgives us very quickly. So those things all need to happen. It can be so frustrating as a parent when your kids make the wrong choice,
hmm
when you know that it's the wrong choice, but God provides a model and says, this is okay. Satan is the one who says, this is how you have to do it, and this is your only option. That's not the path we want to go down.
yeah,
And so we shouldn't do that with our kids either, is my opinion. That doesn't mean that they get choice in everything. Like, hey, dad, I want to start smoking pot. Well, sorry, that's,
yeah,
you know, that's a different thing. It's not like you just get to choose that. But instead of saying, so you start teaching that, right? You teach what the right thing to do is, so that when they do make those choices, you can still love them and you can still forgive them and still move on. Um, and so the first piece is model it after God, and then the second piece is counterintuitive, which is you can have rules but don't have expectations. So don't expect anything from your kids. Let me illustrate this with a story, because I think that it matters a lot. When So I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. When my oldest daughter was born, there was a lot of talk about whose kids were the smartest, the most athletic, the best, whatever.
Yeah.
And when my oldest daughter was born, she was born with Down syndrome. And all those competitions about who would walk at what age and who would talk at what age and who would do whatever, they all just, it just disappeared. Like it
Yeah.
was just gone in a heartbeat because we knew that my daughter was not going to win any
Yeah.
of those contests. And and so then we just stopped caring about those things. And we didn't have an expectation that our kids would by this age do this thing or whatever because Katya was just like behind the curve on all of those things.
Right.
And so when she rolled over at 18 months, we were like overjoyed, over the moon, excited about it. And then when her sister, who was born 19 months after Katya, when she rolled over after like a month, we were like, oh my gosh, this kid's a genius. It's amazing, you know? And, but the thing is, we didn't care when she did it. And so we didn't care when the kids got potty trained, when they slept through the night. You know, I mean, we did care about that one.
Sleep through the night. Oh yeah.
That's a big deal. But like, we didn't, it just didn't matter. And so we have rules for our kids, and this is how we live our life, and these are the things we do. But we don't have any expectation that they're going to follow it or that they're going to do things in the way that we want or any of that. And it's tough to understand what that really means because we still want our kids to do what's right, but we also don't expect that they will. And what I mean by that is that we give them permission to choose their own lives and do what they need to do. And then when they do it, then we're glad and happy. When they don't do it, we're sad and bummed. But regardless, we understand this their choice to make and their life to live, and we can then move on from that. Does that make sense, Jake?
Yeah, that does. I've got an interesting thing in my family. So with my grandparents on both sides, I've got about 50 cousins, about 25 on each side. And the youngest on one side is 17 and the youngest on the other side is 9. So you can kind of see the age range there. But I think probably 90 to 95% of them are active in the church, serve missions, married in the temple, all of that. And then I another family that I'm very close to, it's probably 10%, same number of kids. And that's one thing I just, again, talking about nature versus nurture. It just, it makes me think about what do I do so that I can continue on this legacy and not embrace that legacy, right? And what causes that, and interesting to think about. With that one, even a lot of them serve missions, and then around 22 years old, I almost look at it as a curse on the family that they all step away from the church and kind of go crazy by 22 years old, even after having served missions, some married in the temple, things like that. It's just really interesting where it's probably 90% of them have left versus my family where it's 95 plus are rock solid.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and we have to remember this is a long game that the Lord is playing.
Yeah,
we have a long time to make these decisions and come back to Christ, regardless of how far away we go. So okay, because you are in this AI creation space, what do you think is the greatest invention or discovery that's going to be in the next 10 years?
I think AI video is going to completely change the world. Again, it's in its infancy right now, or you can generate a video, but if you ever try to take a picture and then throw it into one of those video generators, it's weird. It just doesn't work yet. But 10 years from now, I would imagine you're gonna be able to sit down and say, I'd like to watch a video of David W. Patton seeing Cain on the banks of the river, or I don't know, anything you want, and you're going to say, and I want to see this actor playing this this character and this story, and you can sit down and watch a 2-hour movie and you won't be able to tell that it's not real. I within 10 years, I'm totally confident that's going to happen. And what does that mean for the world? President Nelson's talked about if you don't have the Holy Ghost guiding your life, like you cannot know truth. It'll be impossible to survive spiritually, right, without the guiding impact of the Holy Ghost. And that's going to be the case. I mean, you're going to see video. Think about watching the news where you have no idea what's real, and we're pretty close there already. But when you're seeing videos of, let's say, the prophet saying something that no, he never said that, we're pretty much there now, where you can create those videos with deep fakes and all that. But it will absolutely become impossible to know what is real and what is not unless the Spirit testifies. And so it's going to be amazing in some ways, and the death of truth in others.
Well, and to that point, there's going to be things that are we are going to have a hard time telling what is true, and even the very elect will be deceived. Yep. It prophesies in Matthew 24. So we're going to, some of us who are great, strong members of the church who have testimonies are going to be deceived. And like you said, the Holy Ghost is going to be the dispenser of truth, and that's the only way that we'll know. And that is frightening, but also incredibly empowering, that if you are close to the Spirit, then you won't be led astray. But if you are trusting other things more than that, and this is the other thing about kids, is that we have taught our kids from before they got baptized that the gift of the Holy Ghost is a very real thing that literally can be with them every single day, all day. And if you ask any of my kids, what is the thing that Dad always harps on? It is always personal revelation, that you need to receive it yourself, and you have to be responsible for that. And as I've worked with my kids and going through challenges and trials they face, I always put it back on them to seek revelation from the Holy Ghost and make that the way they make decisions, even when they're 9 years old, even when they're 8 years old. And like, they have to know how to do that. That is absolutely essential in my mind, for them to experience that, and not just for them to hear about it and hear other people do it, but for them to actually experience it themselves.
Yeah. And learn now before it gets crazy. I think, learn what the Spirit feels like, learn how it communicates with you. It is different for everybody. And learn as soon as you can, because it's going to be very interesting. I think a lot about, if I had no belief in God or whatever, man, the future is bleak.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah, it is. It is a scary place, but with the Spirit, with the church, with the gospel, I'm excited. The world's got a lot of wonderful things.
Yeah, for sure. So let's keep thinking about the future. You're going to have a baby here pretty soon. That's going to take some adjustment, right? Yep. This is your third kid, so fourth kid, excuse me. Yep. So that's going to require some changes and adjustment and that. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so we this one took a little bit longer to come to us, and so we're in a good spot now where the youngest is almost potty trained, and we can go do things as a family, and she's almost out of nap time and things like that. And now it's a hard reset, which is one of the hardest things for me. I like babies. I really like toddlers, and little kids are even more fun because we can share my hobbies with them, and so it's a reset. I'm looking forward to it in a lot of ways. It will be difficult to slow down. I'm looking forward to just life stopping for that first month of the baby's life, where okay, this is really all that matters, and of course I'll be on wrestle the other 3 kids out of the room duty for for a while. But it's a reminder of what actually matters, to get a new baby in the house. I'm definitely looking forward to that. But it's a lot more work. Hopefully
Yeah.
we can be out of diapers before we get back into diapers and don't have any overlap.
Yeah. We at one point we had 3 kids in diapers,
No, man.
and oh, that was brutal. So our we switched to cloth diapers, and
Okay.
our second child was like, "I'm done. I'm I'm potty training.
Uh,
I don't want any part of this business."
I've seen stats on that yeah, kids used to be potty trained by 18 months routinely, and now it's 3 because diapers are comfortable.
Yeah, they're not that bad.
Yeah, you
So
need to throw an electrode in there.
there you go.
That's a joke for
Yeah,
legal
just a
reasons.
joke, everybody. Not serious. So what great thing do you think God is preparing you for?
Yeah, there's no greater work than raising my kids. I'm convinced of that, and I'm grateful for that challenge and opportunity. I wrote down a goal at the end of my mission that I had a goal to baptize more people after my mission than during my mission. Um, I've not gotten very far on
There's
that.
still time. You got a lot more time than 2 years. So
I should have served in Germany instead. Brazil can be a
yeah,
little bit harder.
that would have helped.
But yeah, I've got to have a lot more kids. Um, no, but I thoroughly enjoyed serving in the church there and getting that. I Yeah, so my patriarchal blessing says that I'll serve at some point as a, a, a shepherd in Israel, right? So as a bishop at some point. I don't know when that will be. I really hope it's not until I know more, know more stuff, and I'm a better person and all that. I don't know when that will be. I know, but I believe in my patriarchal blessing, and I'll do it. I don't. Yeah, I always say that the guy who wants to be on the stand should not be on the stand, and I definitely don't want to be on the stand. It was fun sitting in the back with my kids. So yeah, things like that I keep in mind. Like, okay, am I living now so that when that I'm ready for that whenever that comes. Um, and what can I learn now, and can I learn what I need to quickly so I can get out of that trial.
Yeah,
So
that's
I would love to be more public just with my testimony, I guess. I've tried to be better. Like I said, I'm trying to actually contribute on Twitter a little bit and share things on Instagram and Facebook. I see so much negativity about the church and negativity about being a dad or parenting, and all these moms complaining about their kids and stuff. I'm like, no, kids are the best. Like, that's the purpose of life. And so I've tried to be a little bit more public with that, because I work from home and I live in a town where I only know people in my ward, so I just don't get out that much, and so that's kind of my chance to communicate with people. I would love to be just a little bit more public facing, I guess, in that advocacy for the gospel.
yeah. I have felt that also over the past couple of years, and having been in public school for so long,
Hmm.
it wasn't appropriate for me
Right,
to
right.
be public about it, right? And so now I'm not, and so I feel like I can be
Yeah,
more, and it's really felt good doing this podcast and doing Latter Day Lent, which teaches people about Lent in the Church of Jesus Christ Latter Day Saints, which we don't celebrate but
right.
or observe. But that's been a lot of fun too. Is doing these things that are more true to who I really am. And, I definitely feel like I have put my light under a bushel for some time.
Yeah,
And rather than starting that bushel on fire, making the light bigger, it has blocked the oxygen and made that light smaller.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I really want to be better about that too.
yeah. With my family history storybooks, I'm hesitant to have a business that's, I don't know, close to the church at all. Don't want to, yeah, I don't know, have any conflict of interest there or anything. But it's been so fun because with that I can, I make all the books. I put them into Family Search, so all of these pioneers, those books are free, right? Everything's free for download. It's kind of fun. I can just say, oh, yeah, I don't need this money for this business. I don't really see it being a full-time career. That would be awesome, in the next 10 years if it really took off and I could bring on writers and all that, or if the AI gets to the point where it's just fast and cheap to do, right? Um, but for now,
Or you can just provide the tool for people to do it for themselves.
right, yeah. Well, there's a copycat that has it that way now. The AI is not anywhere near good enough for that, in my opinion. And so if someone comes across that, I say, go try that, go try them, and then come to me when you want something done right. Yeah, but I think that is the future. And so again, is this a career? Probably not. I've got kind of the golden handcuffs of how am I going to replace my salary? Not with this. But this has been a lot of fun, and I enjoy writing the stories. I enjoy doing the research, and it's a good thing that I'm doing, helping people connect with their ancestors, and again, making the books free, trying to get people to care, publishing the miracles out there. That's one thing I'm trying to do now with my Instagram page more, for the business, is to just share some of the stories. And it's fun to be able to, every single book I've done so far has been about a member of the church. It's not meant to be that way. It's for anybody, but somehow only church members care about their ancestors.
Interesting.
And so
Interesting.
anyway,
I wonder if there's a promise somewhere
yeah,
about that.
yeah. Well, I always joke. I'm like, man, I need the spirit of Elijah to work harder here because I need more sales.
Yeah.
But I love doing this, and really do feel like it is making the world a better place, as well as making it so I can feed my kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Jake, this has been awesome chatting with you, and I really appreciate this. I'm looking forward to talking with you over the next decade to see where your life goes. And, not to scare you or anything, but I was called to be a bishop at 33, and my patriarchal blessing doesn't say anything about me being a bishop. So, just saying that
So I live in St. George, though. There are so many guys in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s in my ward who would be amazing and have been bishops and stake presidents and everything else. I'm like, no, I'm a kid.
Yeah, well, out of the mouth of babes. Don't forget that part.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, this has been awesome, and I look forward to chatting with you again. We'll stay in touch between now and then, but people won't hear from you again for another year unless they go find you online and start following you there. So thanks so much for being here.
All right. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.